morning, Warsaw. Today is Tuesday, 8th of August. It will be sunny all day with highs of 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit for our American listeners. Sunrise will be at 5:23 a.m. and sunset at 8:31 p.m. We are on the 8th day of the Warsaw Uprising. Today, a new broadcasting station goes live in Warsaw. But tell us, Roger, what else is happening during the uprising?
Yes, Philippe, you're right. It should be Roger starting off with this. And we are actually. We're going to be talking about Soviet propaganda because they're blasting it all over the radio. So, Roger, you might as well kick us off with this one.
Yes, Polish language radio from Moscow was already turning against the rising. It had, obviously, as we said before, strategically, the Soviets had no sympathy for the rising at all. They saw the insurgents as much as enemies of themselves as enemies of the Germans. Already the messaging on Polish language radio from Moscow is very negative. So denouncing those insurgents as provocateurs, as bandits, and denouncing those people like General Borkomorovsky, leader of the rising in Warsaw, in the same tone. At the same time, the messaging is full of praise of those Polish soldiers fighting under Red Army control. So those are the Berling Army and the Armia Ludowa, the communist underground as well. So there's already a sort of clear demarcation in the messaging that the AK is bad, and that those aligned to Moscow are obviously making every sacrifice of their young lives to build a better Poland. So it's very clear what the messaging is from Moscow.
Although, in fact, the Poles fighting under Soviet command are not actually in the city at all at this point, and the whole resistance is entirely being run by the AK, which is the home army. And so there is this issue about there being a communications vacuum, that the Poles themselves need to get their story over. And this is what they achieve on this day when they actually launch their own. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. In an urban war zone, they launch their own radio station, and they fill the airways with their own testimony of what's really going on inside Warsaw. It was incredibly hard to achieve this. Obviously, they didn't start off with control of the radio station. They had to bring in their own radio equipment. Some have been prepared for this. Some has been held in a city outside called Częstochowa, a very famous holy city in Poland. But some of the radio receivers and the other equipment for it hadn't arrived. Some of it had been diverted. Some of it had got damp and didn't work when it arrived, and had to be dried out. They managed to obtain parts from a captured German radio station, which they used to prop up their own. They found other parts in the post office, the main post office, which they'd taken on earlier on in the building. And they eventually set up their antennae at the top of the massively tall PKO building in the centre of Warsaw. One of the people working on this was Jan Nowak, who we mentioned earlier. He'd actually been a little bit disgruntled right at the start on W Hour on the 1st of August, because while everyone else was finally coming out into the open to fight in the open, he was actually going underground, but literally to transport a very heavy radio pack on his back through some connecting cellars that had been blasted through to get into the building to help set up the first radio station. But they had to wait until they got the rest of the equipment assembled. So it is now that they are able to make their first English language news broadcast. And Novak is working with John Ward and various other people to do this from what they call the Lightning radio station. Alina, just tell us the name in Polish, please.
Radio Błyskawica.
Radio Błyskawica, thank you. So Radio Lightning. And, as one Home Army officer said at that time, from then on, Warsaw did not fight in silence. She called out with a great voice for freedom and justice. And she called out ceaselessly for help. So there are a number of aims with the radio station. One is to tell the world what's happening, who is fighting, what their aims are, what they're achieving. And another one is to request more supplies from the West to support them. Because initially they'd hoped to take the city in a couple of days, but they are prepared to hold out for 2 weeks. And now they are seeking more supplies to enable them to do that.
So we're on the 8th of August, Alina. What's going on the ground now?
So there's a lot going on, and obviously we can't cover everything, so I'm just going to touch the tip of the iceberg. Of course, the old town is under attack. This is a very prized location for the German army. They must have the old town. It's an important strategic point for them. The old town's now on the front line, and various different houses along Krakowskie Przedmieście, which is the road leading from Nowy Świat, so the New World Street, all the way up into the old town. A load of houses there are set on fire on purpose. And the Germans are also using incendiary bombs, things like the Nebelwerfer being dropped onto the old town. And the results of that are beyond comprehensible. People are literally burning alive. Houses are burning. Anything that is touched is just destroyed. But the insurgents are holding strong. The civilians not so much by now. They're under constant bombardment, not just by bombs and not just by various different heavy weaponry, but also by air attack. Moving on slightly to the western part of Warsaw, we've got a German assault on the cemeteries. For anybody who's been to Warsaw, on the western side, you have 3 cemeteries, Powązki military, Powązki civilian, and the Jewish cemeteries, all very in close proximity to each other. So that, of course, is going to be area that is going to be challenged by both sides. So the Germans are pressing incredibly hard, especially on this day in that area of the cemeteries. Reinfeldt's units are supported by a couple of tanks, and they're pushing forward from the west with German assault troops, which are quickly approaching the cemeteries. They're also supported by an armoured train. For those of you who'll be touching a little bit more what an armoured train is, the Home Army units have an organised raid to destroy this train. Unfortunately, this raid's a failure, and the Poles lose about 6 men. Throughout the whole day, you've got heavy fighting between the Germans and the insurgents within that area. And after 7 hours of just continuous struggle, the insurgents have to abandon the cemeteries and retreat. It's very interesting. If you go to the cemeteries now, especially the Jewish cemetery, you'll still be able to see remnants of the battles that were fought there. So certain graves have been damaged, and you can see bullet holes and various different types of explosions that had happened. Anyway, so the insurgents managed to hold their retreated position until about 7 p.m, but they have to retreat much further back because of the German heavy assault on them. But just before 8 p.m, another battalion, the Zośka battalion, they managed to launch a counterattack from a different direction, and they managed to push back the Germans. So what is a good thing, the cemeteries are now in Polish hands, and it was an unsuccessful, but at the same time a successful day for the insurgents of that area. Talking about explosions and various different actions on the ground, Claire, we've not checked in with you about Zoe today. What's happening there?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're now, it's almost ceaseless bombardment in the city. Nobody can avoid that. Most of the civilian population are in cellars and basements, sheltering. But obviously the soldiers, and Zoe is a soldier, part of this group, are out still doing their role. At this point, Rum says the bombardment practically never ceased. And Zoe herself, she is crossing with messages to go to the one of the military commands. And she sees a shell crash down. As it comes down, she can see its trajectory, and there's a small boy out on the street. He's obviously been down in the cellars, but he is out there shouting out that he has shoelaces to sell. I mean, just about anything has currency out there. So this little lad is desperately trying to make some money, maybe get some food for his family. He's trying to sell these shoelaces. And Zoe runs towards him as the bomb comes down. And it hits right beside him. But miraculously, on this occasion, it didn't explode. So she ran up to it. She said it was probably 30, maybe 40 centimeters in caliber. It was still roasting hot. And she pulled the young lad away. But she realized that kind of ammunition, a lot of it was made in Czechoslovakia. And she just blesses the Czechs, because she reckons that a lot of the bombs are made by forced Czech labourers in German war munitions factories, and there is high levels of sabotage there. So she actually thinks that perhaps on this occasion, she and this little lad was saved by the Czech resistors. But in any case, she then goes on. Little boy goes off. He's saved that day. We don't know what happens to him, but she goes on to the PKO building where she delivers her messages. And she finds inside that building, it's a Sunday, there's actually a mass ongoing. And so she joined in with the music. She said, she was feeling this sense of relief. Everyone, it's like a miracle at the moment, every hour that someone's alive. She said they sang with our whole throats, these songs of praise. A lot of them were military songs then that were also songs of worship and patriotic anthems. But then just days later, part of the PKO building collapses after a bomb directly hit the chimney of that building. So really, there is nowhere safe at the moment in Warsaw. So there is almost constant bombing on the city at this point, but there's also a threat on the ground, isn't there, Roger? These atrocities from the German forces haven't diminished.
No, still going on. So the Rona Brigade, the Dielewanger Brigade are still doing their horrific things in Wola and Ochota in the west of the city. So those atrocities are still carrying on, and even elsewhere. So we shouldn't imagine that the crimes being committed are confined to those perpetrators of those two battalions. It's a much wider thing than that. So there's a Grand Theatre in the centre of the city, for example. There's a massacre of 350 civilians carried out there on the 8th of August. So these atrocities are routine across the city and carried out by numerous German units.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. We really appreciate your support, and we will see you tomorrow for day 9.